Have you ever sat and stared up at the stars and wondered, where did we come from? Let's take a journey like no other, not to a place, but to a time. Join us as we delve deep into the human past and explore our shared human origins. Welcome to the world of paleoanthropology.
Hello, everybody. This is Seth with World of Paleoanthropology, here with you once again. I know it's been a little bit. Today, we have another episode of The Story of Us, and I want to have our guest introduce himself, and I'll hand it over.
Hi, Seth. It's great to be here. I'm Evan Hadingham, and I'm the senior science editor at Nova, the PBS science show, which is based at WGBH in Boston. And the reason I'm here is that I have a background in archaeology to some extent, and I've been writing popular articles and books about that subject for a long time. That's the British usage of popular. I mean, for a popular audience, right? Since I've been working at Nova, I've been very lucky to have a chance to work on some of our award-winning shows that have been about great discoveries in paleoanthropology. And so that one thing led to another. And 4 years ago, I was asked by the Leakey Foundation to write a book, which we call Discovering Us. It's just out. And this celebrates 50 years of discoveries in fossils and genetics. And motion picture there you got.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a broad snapshot of how the whole discipline has changed, how our whole understanding of the human past has really been transformed in the last 50 years by advances in not just the fossil discoveries, but of course, particularly by genetics, as we all know. And picking out those 50 stories was one of the daunting things I had to deal with. You know, what was going to be the criterion here for doing a reasonably brief essay on each.
What you have 50 discoveries that you talk about. Is that because it was the 50th anniversary of the Leakey Foundation that they wanted you to do that?
Yeah, that was their idea. So sitting there when I started, facing that was quite a daunting task. I wondered, first of all, well, what should my criteria be? And secondly, how would I unify these stories that cross many different disciplines, go into primatology as well as paleoanthropology? Because, of course, the Leakey Foundation supports research in both those fields as a major funder, as well as supporting through its fellowships the work of indigenous scholars in Africa and India and elsewhere. So this is a large track record that they've carved out here that I had to follow. But in approaching the stories, I really used the same criteria that I bring to my Nova work. And, you know, there's no big secret, of course, on what makes a story work. It's you kind of know it when you see it, although often it's buried under the scientists don't always recognize it if it gets buried under their jargon or too much data. But it has to start with a big question or a big idea, and that's the secret of the Nova's special sauce, if you like. That we have to hook the viewer within the first few minutes of all of our shows, because with all the choices of viewing nowadays, if you don't grab their interest right away, they're fleeing to their iPads or social media or what have you. But if you can dangle something that really catches their interest, and then continue to show how we know what we know, and unfold it like a kind of a puzzle, and following the clues, and of course the story has to go somewhere. You can't have people sit down and watch a show for 50 minutes and then kind of have not progressed in your understanding. Well, you'd be surprised, because there's a lot of shows get pitched to us that are kind of surveys of subjects that don't follow this kind of classic storytelling. I mean, it's the same kind of principles of storytelling that have been around since the days of Homer, really. Yeah, you need a dramatic events, and you need to, at the end of the story, arrive at some kind of resolution. Otherwise, the viewer feels like they've been wasting their time. And in a way, I try to apply that to each of these stories. And I worked hard to make sure that they posed enticing questions that the average reader would get or be drawn into, or something provocative or unusual. I was very intent on, again, showing the process of how things were figured out, both in the field and in the research lab, and also in drawing attention to the younger up and coming scholars, emerging scholars in the field. That was very important to all of us, because there's a few big star names in paleoanthropology that you see dominating a lot of the media on this subject. And we wanted to get away from it because, as I said, this is part of the Leakey Foundation's focus, is to encourage the next generation of scholars.
Right. And I think you have done an absolute, I'm not completely done yet, I'll be honest, reading it. I have quite a lot on my reading list. I am loving this book. I am absolutely, the way it is written is so, it just flows, and the formatting of the book itself and the information that you provide with it, I truly feel like it is a Nova special that I'm watching.
Nice.
And it's truly just transports you to the scenes you're describing, the people you're talking about. I feel like I'm in the room with them. You've done an amazing job with this book. And I do see definitely where, as a fellow science communicator, I see where you're attempting to get at that broader audience. And I think it's definitely something that, once people in that audience are aware of it, are really going to latch on to. And I think this book is going to be one of those books that 50 years from now, they're going to ask, oh, how did you get into anthropology? And they're going to say, oh, discovering us with you and the Leakey Foundation. Honestly,
well, that is actually my fondest hope for the book. That I mean, I think of it as being somewhat expensive, for the average book buyer. But my hope is that sitting in a public library, some kid might look through the lavish photos, and if that person is a minority, or they may recognize themselves in some of the photos we show of people who don't look like the canonical Western scientists out there doing field work, and might think, well, maybe this is a field that, there might be a chance that I can get into this. And that's actually what I care about. But thank you for your nice comments. I think I owe you a beer after this.
And I think, in partnering, with that being one of your main goals, in partnering with the Leakey Foundation, I think you found a great partner in that, because, as you've said, they just strive so hard to bring the next generation from those nations and those places that aren't as economically fortunate as others to pursue higher education in certain areas. And we see the Leakey Foundation the last 50 years been providing those resources. And it's so great to actually see the work that they've been funding in the book. And it's really just fascinating to me, because I'm a big fan of the Leakey Foundation, have been since I heard of them, but you don't really see their work. You hear about it. If you're a scientist, you can go and see it, but you just make it, here it is. And it's very nice.
They have a tiny team of people who get an incredible amount done, and they're very creative. And this was teamwork. I couldn't have done half the research, the photos and everything. So this is really a collective effort that went into this book. And we all discussed, and we just got into this and had a really good time. We all saw this as an opportunity that shouldn't be missed, to reach out to the public, to say, look at all these incredibly varied ways of doing science, all of which throw open different windows on the past and whole lessons for the future, of course.
Yeah, most definitely. The thing that, going back to what you said about catching a viewer's attention in the first few minutes of your specials, I think one of the best pieces of advice I was given about writing, I got in an English senior class, and it was, if you don't catch their attention in the first 3 sentences, you've lost them. They're gone. And I use that constantly, and you're also right about that little blip of happy or hope, or what's at the next hill at the end, where it just gets them going for the next one.
Yeah.
And I think more people need to work that way.
Yeah. I mean, some of the stories had simply an irresistible hook for me. One of my favorite stories, from the point of view of having a kind of irresistible hook at the start of it, concerned a young Ethiopian graduate student called Chalchu Sayum. And he was part of a project that Kay Reed put into the field at Hadar. Hadar, the iconic site where Don Johanson and his team found Lucy back in 1974. And this was the setting for years of hard fieldwork by Kay Reed. And they were in search of fossils, and they were hopeful of finding early traces of our lineage, the Homo genus. And but the conditions were so harsh that Kay used to refer to days of fruitless walking across this barren desert as death marches. Mm-hmm. And they would frequently just come back empty-handed. Well, Chalachu came in on his very first day of fieldwork. He just arrived on the site. This was in 2013. And it's a crazy story, because he literally walks out in the morning, walks a little way up the valley, and climbs a hill, and something white catches his eye, and he said, my heart skipped a beat. And he looked down and picked up this fragment, which turned out to be well preserved, half of a lower jaw and of a hominid. And amazingly, this turned out to be the earliest known fossil of Homo, and that has stood for a decade as the earliest one. It's about 2.8 million years. So you talk about beginner's luck.
Seriously, yeah.
So again, I mean, for me, makes the story extraordinarily memorable. And again, he wouldn't have been in the field without the support of a fellowship from the Leakey Foundation, which made it possible for him to study at Arizona State University. So,
right.
There's somebody new to the field going out there who makes a discovery that's really made a mark and continues to this day.
So what do you think, now that you've gone over the 50 greatest events in the last 50 years, etc., what do you think is next? What is the next big thing that you think could happen? Because I know there's so many possibilities in paleoanthropology. What do you think the next headline is going to be?
Whatever it is, it's going to be different than what we can think of now, because of the surprises that we've had all along. And I'm sorry, that's dodging the question.
No, it's completely okay.
If you think of where we were, think of where we were back 50 years ago, when we thought that the whole human story was a simple ladder of progress, a simple straight line, if you like. To introduce the book, I was trying to figure out a way to get this idea across. And the Leakey Foundation's logo consists of this famous silhouettes of this representation that we've all seen, and it's very familiar, of an ascending line of evolving humans. And
Right.
that was actually, I traced the origins of that image, and it goes back to the famous Time Life book, popular book in 1965 called Early Man by Clark Howell, where they had this magnificent fold out image of 15 ancestors all strung out in a row, with Pliopithecus from 30 million years, the Pliocene, down on the left-hand side, all the way up. And it seemed like this smooth, ascending, unified process. There's a slight blip with the Neanderthals, of course, because they're the ones that didn't make it. The artist was a little uneasy with it. He expressed, Rudolf Zallinger expressed some misgivings to the editor that this was really too, isn't this a little too simplistic? But the editor said, oh no, this is going to really make an impression on people. And it really did. It became kind of the Stephen Jay Gould called it the canonical representation of evolution that everybody remembers, essentially. And it stuck there, and it gave you the idea of humans being very special and a kind of unstoppable force. And this has had real consequences in terms of the way we imagine this process. The common thought at that time was that we had this package of stuff that made us special. We were walking, we had fire, we made tools, and this was what distinguished us, which it obviously did, from other primates. But this somehow gave us a trajectory in evolution quite different to all the other much messier lineages that we see in the natural world. And interestingly, in 1965, Louis Leakey himself had pushed back against this to some degree. And I have this lovely little statement he made in looking back to a previous generation who kind of believed in this straightforward linear account of human evolution. He wrote, theoretically, this has always seemed highly unlikely to some of us, since it meant that man had done something which no other mammal had done, evolved in a single straight line instead of having one main branch with many experimental side branches, which failed to make the grade. Yet the old theory persists. Well, it still persists somewhere in the back of our minds to this day, but boy, the stage is now crowded, as we know, with many parallel species coexisting until really very recently in the long view, so that we know, that say around 100,000 or 70,000, modern humans, we were coexisting with Neanderthals, Denisovans, at least 3 different flavors of Denisovans, right?
Right.
And the Denisovans were interbreeding with the modern humans and the Neanderthals. And then, of course, we have the oddball guys, or I shouldn't say guys, I should say the oddball species, the diminutive hobbit, right, in the forest, and extraordinary Homo naledi back there in South Africa. And so here we have this thicket of ancestors, and in one sense, we weren't special. What would it have taken for us to have not made it as opposed to them? It's not clear. Obviously, we did have these advantages of technology and so on, but it just shifts your whole sense of what it means to be human and how special we are. And that's really the big message that I wanted to try to convey, and that I think the field is telling us now loud and clear.
Right, definitely. And I think part of that understanding is also knowing how close we have come to going extinct, just like any other branch of the hominin family tree. Like, after the Toba eruption, for example,
Yeah,
that what the estimate was, there were 10,000 modern humans left, I believe.
so they say.
Something.
Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
So, I mean, we've come close. We've come very
Right,
close, but something just makes us bounce back. And it's
right.
that discovering what that is, I think, is what will make us, quote, uniquely human.
Yeah, yeah. There's a
But
resilience
yeah,
there that certainly seems to be a part of the human story,
yes,
through many swings of climate. And although the current one we're facing is different in scale, of course, to anything that we've lived through in the past. So all bets are off, but perhaps we shouldn't go there. Spoiler
yeah.
day.
I mean, today is Earth Day, so get out
Yeah,
there and try to be better for the planet, everybody. But
yes,
yeah, it's pretty bleak on that end right now. So let's
yeah,
focus on the past of human
yeah.
history a little more. So one thing that I also just did you have any involvement with picking the art on the cover?
Yes.
Okay.
And it was a very, very interesting hunt. And it parallels problems we have doing novas on this subject of how you represent ancestors and people in the past, which they're very acute problems.
Right.
And they've changed quite a bit over time. The first series that Nova did was In Search of Human Origins. That was its title, and it was done with Don Johansson in 1994. And there we had Lucy and her Australopithecine kind dressed in monkey suits, and fortunately photographed tastefully against the lakeside backdrop, so you couldn't see too much of the details, and that kind of
Right.
worked,
Right.
mostly close-ups. When we got to our second series was called Becoming Human, and that was in 2009. And there we did our first attempt to do computer graphics of hominins like the Turkana boy, for example. We had a whole episode on that. And boy, do those look primitive now. The state of those graphics then, they look awkward and cheesy.
Understandable. Yeah.
And then, of course, the third way to go is the full-scale reenactment of modern humans and Neanderthals. And over the years, I've kept clips of my favorite awful reenactments because there's just the Monty Python factor or the Men in Tights factor that you simply can't avoid. So, I mean, what we tell all our producers now who face this issue is less is better. and it's much more effective and powerful if you can just be suggestive and show, hazy impressionistic close-ups that are moody and atmospheric, but don't attempt to show things literally.
Mm-hmm.
And as for the cover of the book, well, it consists of a gallery of these magnificent wax figures by the Parisian artist Elizabeth Daigne. And we had a big debate over what image would be representative of this huge diversity that we present in the book. And it was a struggle to pick it out. And then I decided or suggested that we should pick an image that is different from your standard, what's the right word? I can't. There's no way to talk about this without misspeaking. So I simply presented a picture of someone from a diverse ethnic and national background that you would not normally see in this context. And we felt that this was saying an important message, that this was just saying, we're not telling quite the usual story here. And we thought it would be intriguing for people, who is this guy?
100%. The moment I saw this cover, which was before I even knew what was going on with this book, I was immediately, who is that?
Yeah,
who is
right.
who is that on the cover?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to picture the skull underneath, obviously, because my thing is like skull morphology and
All
trying
right.
to
Yeah.
do things with that. So I'm trying to
Yeah.
figure that out. I'm like, where is this person from?
Yeah.
You know, it's very interesting. And
Yeah.
then when I got the book, it says, I think on the inside
Yeah.
flap.
Yeah.
Um,
I've forgotten who our central figure is, to be honest. His
I
exact
think he's
affiliate.
I think it was Central
Yeah.
Korea 10,000 years
Yeah.
ago or something.
He's Homo sapiens, Mandelson Mountain from North Korea, 10,000
North
to
Korea.
12,000.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, I was very intrigued on who that was because
Yeah.
they just you don't see anthropology books with individuals that look like that on the
Yes.
cover. And I
Well,
think that was a very good choice.
the other issue is the title was Discovering Us. So, he's one he's one of us.
Exactly.
He's that so putting a modern human there rather than Lucy or one of these fossil ancestors just seemed the way to go.
Definitely. I think it will definitely pay its dues in the end. Now, so how long have you been the senior editor at Nova, senior science editor at Nova, which is a huge title, by the way, and I want to hear a lot about what that entails. But let's start with how did you get there and when was that?
Well, I had a very peculiar entry into this profession. Throughout my 20s and half of my 30s, I was a full-time archaeology book writer and/or volunteer on rescue excavations in England and France. I did go back to school and put myself through a one-year master's at the University of Sheffield, which gave me a very important grounding in prehistory that I hadn't had before, and allowed me to kind of get my act together. So, and the high point of my experience, I guess, in the field was the 2 summers I spent working on Paleolithic cave sites in France. And that was really my introduction to the Ice Age and to the whole notion of this long human ancestral story. And this was for a book I wrote called Secrets of the Ice Age. And I was lucky enough to visit some 50 or so of the painted caves in France and Spain. They gave me a permit to photograph too in many of these caves, which I think I was part of the last generation or last few popular writers to get that. And those were still the high points of my life. Those were the strongest, most lasting, kind of life-changing moments underground. When I would come face to face with a stencil hand on a cave wall, and it's such an intimate acquaintance with this person from the past, and your mind cannot grasp the fact that the person you're making contact was there 28,000 years ago, and we now know these handprints go back way before the figurative arts, which is extraordinary in itself. So I continued this path. I was born in the U.S., so was but grew up in Britain, was based in Britain. And then I came over in my late 20s and settled in Cambridge. And there I got absorbed in writing a book about archaeoastronomy in the Americas and on the Nazca Lines in Peru. And at the end of that, I met the right partner, time to settle down, which I did. And I was very lucky to get into a fellowship, which doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately, that took science writers and gave them a year's training in radio and television. We got our feet wet, and it was just enough to kind of show you what was involved. And then at the end of it, we were fairly unemployable because we had minimal experience, but we were these nerds that were ready to take on science broadcasting. And I've been very lucky because I've been there pretty much ever since. And the fortunate part about it is that some of the most popular novas have been archaeology, the quest for answers, origins in general. So, physics and cosmology is an incredibly popular subject because that asks profound, questions too. And so it's really through no planning of my own, I ended up in this job, which has helped to support my habit. And I've really had an extraordinary time just working with Don Johansson on the first In Search of Human Origins, experiences like that, and interacting with great producers. And I'm glad to say that Nova is going from strength to strength in this changing media environment, that broadcasting is now not the only thing we do, but that we've had a great success in short form video and social media and different ways to get good, responsible science out there by a new generation of, generally speaking, 30-something digital geniuses that kind of leave me in the dust in that respect. But once again, it's all about storytelling. It's all about grabbing people with, a provocative idea and telling the story in a way that is enticing, but gets things right and doesn't go above their heads, but shows how it's done, and shows the uncertainty too. Shows the uncertainty because one thing is that, of course, this whole neat dramatic scenario, the dramatic arc of a story, is not the way science works, because science is open-ended. As we know, it's constantly changing and challenging itself. Right. So the question of how you resolve a program or one of these essays is always tricky. How do you bring the curtain down, get your verdict right, because you're usually making some kind of judgment on it, and do it in a way that hopefully leaves the door open for future correction and progress. Definitely.
And I think that's a big difference between, science communication and other forms of knowledge out there. Is science is ever changing. You have to let it change. And it's those individuals who think they know everything from the get-go who end up knowing the least about things. And those who have an open mind seem to adapt better to change. And that is what we need in science. And I think, as a kid who has grown up on Nova, I remember all through elementary school, all the Nova specials on just everything from, so many different topics. I am so thrilled and honored to be talking to you right now. I want to go run and tell all my elementary school teachers I'm talking to the senior science editor at Nova. They wouldn't believe it.
Seth, I'm telling you, you're doing a pretty good job with these remarkable series of interviews that you posted up, which is a real service, certainly to me, to researchers like me, and to others who want to understand the field. And you know how to ask questions to make people talk accessibly. This is a huge deal. I just thought that I was thinking about the open-endedness of this. There were times when I was writing these essays when I had to keep going back and revising things. And I thought, when will this story stop changing? Darn it.
There's actually a specific one in the book when you're talking about the Laetoli footprints.
Yes.
And so you talk about the site, I always get them confused, the site G tracks, right?
Yes.
And then the other one that we have. But I asked Dr. Ellie McNutt, I don't know if you know of her, but she's been working at Laetoli recently on the site A prints.
That's right.
And I asked her, because I'm like, was this book published like right before your paper came out? Or she's like, yeah, I just looked and our paper came out 10 days before that book was published. So I guess
Yeah,
their research didn't make it into the book. And it's just like, that's how fast it moves. And that's just
yeah.
what's so exciting about it to me is, I mean, the book's no less correct. It's just, there's more info.
There's always more. There's always more. And Seth, I didn't know about that, about her work until I read it in your essay yesterday. So there you go. There's an example of you doing a good job of reporting the latest stuff. That's great.
Well, that makes my heart truly fly. But yeah,
I've also
yeah.
taken the two prints and put them side by side, and I've added them to my presentation that I'm now going to give at libraries and bookstores. Actually,
Oh,
at my
that's
local
so
public library on
cool.
Tuesday, because I think it's amazing to think about this unknown hominid, maybe at the same time, maybe not. We don't know how those two
Right.
trackways relate to one another. But you sort of imagine them casting sideways glances at one another as you walk across the landscape.
Well, I think you quote Dr. Johansson, and he says, like, you know, one of the individuals turned and looked over in one direction or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I wonder if that other trackway is in that direction. Like, do we actually have evidence of them turning and looking at a possible, and that's the real proof that I don't think anyone can deny anymore, that there were multiple hominins living at one time and
Absolutely.
coexisting.
Yeah.
And it's just, I mean, you want the proof in the pudding.
Well, the genetics is telling us that. And again, one of the most hair-raising things has been the discovery of hitherto known huge populations for which our only evidence really, or nearly all our only evidence is genetics. And of course, I'm thinking of the Denisovans here. But also the revelation that there's this ghost lineage in Asia, discovered by a machine learning program working on genetic data, not even humans in the loop.
I know. Yeah.
And here we have, another piece of the family, not family bush or braided stream, another rivulet in the stream that we would not have ever known about. And that's, what it reminds me is our cosmology shows and the whole problem of dark matter. There's this stuff out there that you can only find out about in this indirect manner, but keeps constantly surprising you. It's sort of the dark matter of the human past, if you like.
And definitely the way I think we're going to see that lighten up is through genetics, as you've mentioned. I think that's definitely, it's not the only way forward, not by far, but it's going to be a big piece, I think, of understanding.
Yeah.
And, obviously we need more in the fossil record. That's always going to be a huge help.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, I may be wrong, but is there not a ghost population found in DNA also in Africa at this point? It might be Asia. I might be confused.
I know there's one in Asia, but I think there has been recent work on the whole peopling of the African continent has just gotten a lot more complicated. As we know that.
Right.
And now it's all recognized that around 300,000, there were multiple contributions to coming together to form our anatomically modern human identity, that it wasn't some flip of a genetic switch in some particularly smart ancestor somewhere. So clearly the population history of Africa, well, I mean, so much less work has been done there compared to the traditional centers of study like Europe and, so once again, it's kind of stay tuned for the breaking news.
Exactly. Now, going back to the book a little bit, So obviously you said you were working very closely with the Leakey Foundation. It was a small
Yeah.
team. You were all working very closely. What was the process of picking, say, the current grad students, the current PhD students? I mean, I know they have, I mean, obviously they don't have a huge amount of people to choose from, but how how did you pick certain stories versus others? I'm
Well,
sure,
my
they're all great, but
well, that favorite story that I talked to you about, Chalachu, that was actually based directly on an Origin Stories podcast. Origin Stories is the podcast of the Leakey Foundation, and it's run by an extremely talented producer, Meredith Johnson, who handles all the communications for the Leakey Foundation, which is an enormous job, as well as producing this great podcast. So, I heard the story from, from Chalachu's own lips, so to speak. So there were certain origin stories that were just served up on a plate. Like, you can't get a better story than this, and the way that Meredith did it. So that was a slam dunk. The other ones were just a process of kind of trial and error, evolved and changed over time. I had the fortune to be steered very well by distinguished members of the Leakey's Science Executive Council. And I have to particularly acknowledge Harvard's Dan Lieberman, who to some degree took me under his wing and made me feel that I could call him up with bounce ideas off him, and is this discovery for real? And he would gently correct me and say, I don't think so. I wouldn't bother with that one if I were you, sort of thing. And of course, I one of my favorite essays was writing up his long distance running hypothesis, which is a great.
I think that's the one I'm on right now, actually.
Oh,
like, okay. I think that's actually the one I'm reading right now.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, so just curating these stories must have just, would you say it was more fun or more of a task?
Oh, the whole thing was a blast.
That's good to hear.
An extreme challenge, but I felt this was an opportunity I will never get again to do this type of an essay with. Basically, I was given more or less a complete editorial independence, although of course the drafts were reviewed by the people in the Science Executive Council. But in terms of really picking which ones would work and how to approach them, it was kind of like I was in my own little artist studio and messing around with paints, and could go, that makes it sound like that's not the way I research. But I'm just saying it was a very creative process. That's really all I'm saying. And I was very lucky to be kind of left to my own devices to a large degree to figure out how to tell these stories, which ones to pick. It is not, I really did not want this to be a promotional publication for the foundation. I wanted to have the most important stories in the science and to show the process of how it was done, and have good journalism and good judgments in it. And that's sort of my ideals in trying to do this.
And I think, I know I've said it a few times now, but I think you've done such a great job in doing that. You really do highlight, we're hearing, of course, the important bedrock stories, who Lucy is, how she was discovered, Narukatoni boy, etc. But then there's the stories about these students, these next generation individuals who are going to be bringing the science forward and doing their own work, and giving them even if it is a chapter in a book, that's so much more publicity than they could have gotten otherwise. And I think it's providing opportunities just because you wrote the book that they wouldn't have otherwise. And I'm learning and hearing names, and I'm writing a few down for who I want to invite on my show to be interviewed.
Excellent.
and it's really a thrill, and you can tell the creativeness that you were given by just how well it flows. Because some books, especially when we're talking science, even the best science communication books can be a little dry and rigid. But
Right.
this is very, you can tell you had fun doing it, and that I was telling my partner before this
Mm.
interview started, they're like, "How do you think this is gonna go?" And I'm like, "Well, if he talks and is like the way he writes, this is gonna be a great interview." And I'm glad to say it is.
Well, thank
And
you.
it's been great. So do you have plans for any future books that we can get a hint on?
Well, I am in a 9 to 5 job, at least for the time being. I'm getting long in the tooth. So the my ideal for when retirement comes, um, probably not a book, but I'd like to write feature articles, and do stuff for blogs, maybe contribute to a blog or run my own blog. I'm not sure.
I'm sure many people would be interested in that, so that would be
Yeah,
a lot of fun. It
yeah,
is quite fun when you
yeah.
get down to it and you have the time for
Well,
it.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
this book did teach me, or it trained me really in how in cranking out this particular format of a 1,000 word story,
Mhm.
um, which was quite a challenge when it comes to doing like the Neanderthal genome. How do you how do
Yeah,
you convey the essence of that in 1,100 words? And of course you can't.
right.
You just have to pick off pieces of it that hopefully convey enough of the process that people will get it and have some understanding, no more at the end of reading it than they did when they started. Let's put it that way.
Yes, yes. That is a challenge I'm finding in school currently, where
Oh yeah.
I am used to being able to write as much as I want, and now they're like, you need to fit it in this amount of
Yeah.
space,
Yeah.
and need to be concise and get the point
Yeah.
across, but make it
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
But it's, I people who take your position and do the things that you do really inspire myself, and I'm sure other
Oh,
people like me, to do the things that we plan on doing. I plan on pursuing a PhD and doing my own research, but at the same time, I want to definitely continue my stuff with world of paleoanthropology
wonderful.
and
Yeah.
journalism and all of that. And I want to combine it and just
Great.
make science for everyone and relatable to everyone. And Nova and PBS, I mean, that's where the kids start. And it's so cool that, it was like Nova and Bill Nye the Science Guy. Like that was my childhood. um, and so yeah, yeah, was there anything else you wanted to add? Because I think this has gone wonderfully.
I'm very hmm. One thing that comes up, um, is the way I decided to end the book, was the question
Mhm.
of, are we still evolving? Because that's something that
Mm,
people are really, really curious about.
yes, yes.
And those people are really stuck on the idea that somehow our bodies got frozen around the time. I mean, not literally. I mean,
Right, right.
the biology and structure and adaptations of our body got stuck around the time that agriculture came along, and that ever since then, culture has kind of insulated us from natural forces. It's the only way you can explain something as weird as the paleo diet, for example. The notion that somehow our digestion and metabolism has remained, the same as it was back when, and uh, I was really amazed to dig into this and discover that, in fact, the rate of change of our genome is actually speeding up. That we're like, again, the cosmology parallel would be the expansion of the universe, which we now know is accelerating quite counterintuitively. Quite counterintuitively. We're evolving faster than ever, and that's understandable because our populations, of course, have grown so much. There's far more material for genetic mutations to go to work on. So there's no mystery or dark secret about it. But I do think that the notion that the human genetic and sorry, but I do think the notion that the essence of what it means to be human is changing and always changing, and changing faster and faster is something that people don't appreciate. And maybe it's part of that resilience that will help us get us through the next challenges of the next few decades. Who knows? I don't mean to take out on a big idea there, but it was an important part of trying to wrap up the book. Yeah.
Definitely. And, I think that is a great place, not only for your book to end, but for this interview to leave off, because, a lot of people do wonder if we're evolving. Answer is yes, you heard it here. We are still evolving, no doubt about it. Where will we end up? Well, that's a little different story.
Right.
So I'm going to say, before I stop recording, thank you so much for coming on the show. It has been an absolute blast. I am so thankful that you accepted my invitation, and it's been great having you.
Well, keep up the good work, Seth. You're doing a great job. So.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for watching this episode of The Story of Us. I hope you had an amazing time and learning experience. My guests and I had a great time putting this together for your enjoyment. I hope that you learned something and that there's always more to learn. If you would like to watch our previous episodes, please view them on my YouTube channel or my website, which is listed in the description below. And please subscribe and like to not miss future episodes. Thank you all so much, and have a great rest of your day.